Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what I want to do is I want to essentially change the color of Paris, we'll say just the color, when a user clicks on a button. Okay, so if you want to try and code that ahead of time, please do. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to create a button in the HTML file, and then using document.getElementById, you can store that into a variable called button. And what this tutorial is going to be about is I'm going to teach you about onclick, an inbuilt method in JavaScript that is essentially an event listener. So what we're going to be doing in this tutorial is listening out for an event. So instead of just the HTML page loading and the JavaScript file loading and automatically it changes the color of Paris, we only want to do that when a user clicks on a button. So that's what this tutorial is going to be about. So the first thing we need to do, first of all, is we actually need to create a button. So let's do that. So we will have an opening button tag and a closing button tag. And we will just say, click me to the user. So if I just save and refresh, we now have a button there that says click me. And the only way so far in this course we know how to query HTML elements from the DOM or using a document object model is with ID. So we need to give this button an ID. So we will say ID is equal to button and press Ctrl S to save. And now our button has an ID. And that's awesome. Okay, great. Now what I want to do is I want to create a variable called button, and we'll say document.getElementById. We'll pass in the ID of button and we'll store it in a variable button. So what we'll do is we'll say let button be equal to document.getElementById. We have our parentheses, and what we need to do is we need to just pass in the ID of the button. So we've given this button an ID of button, okay? Button is the only element on this HTML page that has an ID of button. And then what we can do is if I just say console.log button, and remember button is a variable, so when I log out to the console button is a variable here, and it has been assigned to the value of document.getElementById. So using that method getElementById, we're basically grabbing this element from the document object model. So if I just open up my console, and if I refresh, we see here we get the button. Okay, that's awesome. So now we've got the button. Let's just add an event listener to it. So what I'll do is I'm going to show you now about the onclick event listener. How this works is you take the element, in this case the button, using dot notation we've access to onclick, this inbuilt event handler or property inside of JavaScript. And then what we can do is when the user clicks on the button, we're going to run a function. So we're just going to say button.onclick and assign it the value of function. It'll be a function that isn't expecting, any arguments passed in. And because it's our first time working with event listener, let's just say you clicked me. We're just going to log that out to the console, okay? So now what I've done is firstly, I've created a button in JavaScript, opening button tag, closing button tag. We have the click me text there. So that's what the user sees, okay? We gave the button an ID of button. Then in our JavaScript file, we basically took that button that we saw because we said document.getElementById and we passed in the button ID. We stored it in this variable button. So button here is just a reference to the button we saw on the page. And when the user clicks on the button, because we use onclick, we run a function, and the function just logs out you clicked me. So that function will only run when I click on the button. If I refresh the page, nothing happens. But if I click on the button, we log out, you clicked me. Awesome. So we've just listened out for an event happening in this course for the first time. So that's pretty cool. But instead of logging out you clicked me, what I actually want to do is I want to change the color of this paragraph here with the ID of city. So we know how to do that. So all we need to do is, instead of just logging something out of the console, let's say document dot get element by ID. We want to pass in the ID of city because that is the ID for this paragraph with the value of Paris. And what we want to do is we want to essentially change its style, specifically the color. So using dot notation, we can access style and then dot notation again, color. And we've seen this notation before with objects. And all we need to do is just pass in the value that we want. And I'm going to change the color to blue. So now when the user clicks on the button, we've an event listener here. Please note the lowercase c. And we've assigned that the value of a function with no name. And when the user clicks on the button, we're going to say document dot get element by ID, the city. We're getting a reference to the paragraph here with the ID of city. And we're changing the color to be blue. So if I save and refresh, Paris is now blue. If you wanted, you could also change it to be red, because that is also another color on the French flag. So if I save and refresh and click again, Paris is now red. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is the onclick inbuilt property in JavaScript. It is very powerful as we can use it to listen out for a user event, i.e. do some code, but only when the user clicks on a button. So we're starting to understand now the power of the document object model, where instead of just adding an element to a page and then just changing it for no reason, the way we did the last few tutorials, you can now change content based on a user click. So that's awesome, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.